The dust-stained telegram trembled in Leanna Bailey's hands as she read the threatening words for the fourth time, her heart pounding with dread at the ultimatum it delivered. It was 1876, in the frontier town of Red Canyon, Arizona Territory, and the peaceful life she had carefully built was about to shatter like glass beneath a boot heel. Leanna folded the telegram and tucked it into the pocket of her dress, her fingers lingering on the rough paper as if touching it might somehow change its contents. At 22, she had already overcome more hardships than most women twice her age. After losing her parents to typhoid 3 years prior, she had transformed their small general store into a thriving business that served as the lifeblood of Red Canyon. The evening breeze carried the scent of sage through the open window of her store as she locked the register. The town was settling in for the night, lanterns flickering to life in windows along the dusty main street. Normally, this was her favorite time of day, when the heat gave way to cool desert air and the stars began their nightly performance. But tonight, every shadow seemed to harbor danger. "You should not be alone, Miss Bailey," came a deep voice from the doorway. Leanna spun around, her hand instinctively reaching for the small derringer she kept beneath the counter. She relaxed slightly when she recognized Xavier Blackburn, a cattle driver who had arrived in town the previous week. He stood tall in the doorframe, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the dimming light outside. "Mr. Blackburn," she acknowledged with a polite nod, "I appreciate your concern, but I assure you I can manage on my own." Xavier stepped into the store, removing his hat. At 26, he had the weathered look of a man who lived by the code of the open range. His eyes, however, held a gentleness that contradicted his rugged appearance. "Begging your pardon, madam, but I overheard talk at the saloon. The Hastings gang has been spotted near town. Folks are worried." Leanna's fingers unconsciously touched the pocket containing the telegram. Wesley Hastings had made his intentions clear. He wanted the deed to her property, which contained the only reliable water source for miles. The telegram had given her 3 days to comply, or as he crudely put it, face the consequences. "Mr. Blackburn, Xavier, please." "Xavier," she corrected herself, surprised by the informal exchange. "I appreciate your warning, but this is my home. I will not be frightened away by threats." A hint of admiration flickered across his face. "I respect your courage, Miss Bailey, but Hastings is not a man to be taken lightly. He has killed for less than what you have." Leanna moved to the door, signaling that their conversation was over. "Thank you for your concern. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to close up." Xavier replaced his hat and stepped back onto the wooden boardwalk. "Of course. Good evening, Miss Bailey." As she watched him walk away toward the town's only hotel, Leanna couldn't deny the strange flutter in her chest. There was something about Xavier Blackburn that intrigued her. Perhaps it was the quiet strength he exuded, or maybe it was simply that he was the first man in Red Canyon who had spoken to her as an equal rather than just a shopkeeper or a potential wife. The following morning dawned with a promise of scorching heat. Leanna opened the store early, hoping that routine would calm her nerves. The telegram's deadline was still 2 days away, and she had yet to decide how to respond to Hastings' demands. By midday, the store was busy with the usual crowd: ranchers' wives stocking up on supplies, miners spending their meager earnings, and travelers passing through on their way to California. Leanna was ringing up Mrs. Peterson's purchase of flour and sugar when the doors burst open. 5 men entered, their spurs jangling ominously against the wooden floor. The conversations in the store died immediately. Wesley Hastings himself led the group, his lean face partially obscured by a scraggly beard. The revolver on his hip gleamed in the sunlight streaming through the windows. Well, Miss Bailey," Hastings drawled, moving toward the counter. "I believe you received my message." Leanna straightened her spine, refusing to show fear. "I did, Mr. Hastings, and my answer is no." A dangerous smile spread across Hastings' face. "I don't think you understand the situation, darling. This isn't a negotiation." The store had emptied quickly, customers fleeing at the first sign of trouble. Only Mrs. Peterson remained frozen beside the counter, her aged face pale with fear. "Mrs. Peterson," Leanna said calmly, "please go home now." The older woman hesitated, then scurried out, throwing a frightened glance over her shoulder. "Now," Hastings continued, leaning on the counter, close enough that Leanna could smell the whiskey on his breath, "I'm not leaving without that deed." "Then you'll be staying in Red Canyon indefinitely," Leanna replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "That land has been in my family for generations. I won't give it up." Hastings' eyes hardened. "Boys," he called to his men, "help Miss Bailey pack her things. She'll be coming with us until she sees reason." Two of the men moved around the counter, grabbing Leanna by the arms. She struggled, kicking over a display of canned goods that clattered to the floor. "Let go of me," she shouted, hoping someone in town would hear the commotion. As if in answer to her unspoken prayer, the store door opened again, and Xavier Blackburn stepped inside. He assessed the situation in an instant, his hand hovering near his holstered Colt. "I suggest you gentlemen release the lady," he said, his voice deceptively calm. Hastings turned, amusement playing across his features. "And who might you be?" "Just a man who doesn't appreciate seeing a woman manhandled," Xavier replied. One of Hastings' men drew his weapon, but before he could aim, Xavier's gun was out, the barrel pointed steadily at the man's chest. "I wouldn't," Xavier warned. The tension in the room crackled like lightning before a storm. Leanna could see the calculation in Hastings' eyes as he weighed the odds. 5 against 1, Hastings observed. "Not good odds for a hero." "I like those odds better than you might think," Xavier replied. A tense moment passed before Hastings nodded to his men. "Let her go. For now." The grip on Leanna's arms loosened, and she pulled away, rubbing the spots where their fingers had dug into her flesh. "We'll be back, Miss Bailey," Hastings promised as he backed toward the door. "And next time your protector might not be around." After they left, the store seemed unnaturally quiet. Leanna's legs felt suddenly weak, and she gripped the counter for support. "Are you all right?" Xavier asked, holstering his weapon. "Yes," she managed. "Thank you." He nodded, his expression serious. "They will be back, just as he said. Hastings doesn't make idle threats." "What am I supposed to do? Give up everything my parents worked for?" Xavier studied her for a long moment. "No, but staying here alone isn't an option anymore." "Do you have family you can go to?" Leanna shook her head. "No one. My parents were my only family." A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the window, they could see Sheriff Thomas Parker approaching, his deputy in tow. The aging lawman entered the store, looking concerned. "Miss Bailey, I just heard about Hastings being in town. Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Sheriff," Leanna assured him. "Thanks to Mr. Blackburn." The sheriff's eyes flicked to Xavier, assessing him with the wariness of a man who had seen too many drifters cause trouble. "Hastings threatened to return," Xavier informed him. "I don't think Miss Bailey is safe here." Sheriff Parker ran a hand over his silver-streaked mustache. "I wish I could disagree, but Hastings has more men than I have deputies. Best I can do is keep an eye on the store, but I can't provide round-the-clock protection." "I can't just abandon my business," Leanna protested. "Your business won't matter if you're dead," Xavier pointed out bluntly. "Or worse." The implication hung heavy in the air. Women who crossed men like Hastings often met fates that made death seem merciful by comparison. "Perhaps you should consider leaving town temporarily," the sheriff suggested. just until I can send for reinforcements from Tucson." Leanna crossed her arms, frustration building. "And go where exactly?" "My ranch is 2 days' ride south of here," Xavier offered unexpectedly. "It's remote. Hastings wouldn't think to look for you there." Both Leanna and the sheriff stared at him in surprise. "Mr. Blackburn," Leanna began, "while I appreciate your help today, I hardly know you. I can't just—" "You can stay in the main house with my housekeeper, Mrs. Wilkins," Xavier clarified. "I'll sleep in the bunkhouse with my ranch hands. Your reputation would remain intact." Sheriff Parker tugged at his mustache, considering. "It's not a bad idea, Miss Bailey. Blackburn's outfit is well established. I've never heard anything unsavory about him or his business." Leanna looked between the two men, feeling cornered. The idea of leaving her store, her home, went against everything in her nature. Yet the memory of Hastings' men gripping her arms, the cold determination in their leader's eyes, sent a chill down her spine. "I'll need time to think about it," she finally said. Xavier nodded. "I understand, but don't take too long. I'd guess they'll be back by nightfall." After the sheriff and Xavier left, Leanna closed the store early and retreated to her living quarters above the shop. She packed a small bag just in case and sat by the window, watching the sun descend toward the horizon. The decision weighed heavily on her mind. Her contemplation was interrupted by the sound of horses outside. Heart racing, she peered through the lace curtains to see Hastings and at least a dozen men surrounding the store. This time, they hadn't come to negotiate. She grabbed her bag and the deed to her property, secured in a leather folio, and hurried down the back stairs. Just as she reached the storeroom, the front doors splintered open, and heavy boots thumped across the wooden floor above. "Search upstairs," Hastings commanded. Leanna slipped through the back door into the alley, praying that the gathering darkness would conceal her. She had barely made it 10 steps when rough hands seized her from behind. "Looky what I found, boss," called one of Hastings' men, dragging her back toward the store. Hastings emerged from the building, a satisfied smile spreading across his face. "Miss Bailey, you're making this much harder than it needs to be." "Let me go," she demanded, struggling against her captor. "I'm afraid I can't do that. You see, that water source on your property is going to make me a very rich man once the railroad comes through." He reached for her bag, rummaging through it until he found the leather folio. "Ah, here we are." "You won't get away with this," Leanna said, her voice shaking with anger. Sheriff Parker Hastings laughed. "Is currently tied up in his office along with his useless deputy. Now, you'll be coming with us as insurance until I'm sure this deed transfers without any legal complications." He nodded to his men, and before Leanna could protest further, she was lifted onto a horse, her hands bound to the saddle horn. Hastings mounted his own horse beside her. "If you behave, you'll be back home in a week or two," he promised. "If not—" He left the threat unfinished. As the gang rode out of town, Leanna looked back at the place that had been her home since birth. Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them away, refusing to give Hastings the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a small voice whispered that Xavier Blackburn would notice her absence. Whether that would matter was another question entirely. Xavier had spent the evening at the saloon, nursing a whiskey while keeping an eye on the door, half expecting Leanna to seek him out. When Sheriff Parker burst in, his face bloodied and his hands raw from freeing himself from ropes, Xavier knew something was terribly wrong. "Hastings took her," the sheriff announced to the room at large, "broke into her store and abducted her. They're headed south toward the Sonora border." Xavier was on his feet instantly. "How long ago?" "Maybe 2 hours. I've been trying to organize a posse, but most folks are too afraid of Hastings to volunteer." Xavier didn't wait to hear more. He left the saloon and strode purposefully to the livery stable where his horse, Thunder, was boarded. The black stallion sensed his urgency and stood quietly as Xavier saddled him. "Going after her alone is suicide," the sheriff warned, appearing at the stable door. "Waiting until morning could be worse for her," Xavier replied, checking his saddlebags to ensure he had sufficient ammunition. "I know these lands better than Hastings. I can track them." The sheriff hesitated, then handed Xavier a deputy's badge. "Take this, gives you legal authority if you catch up to them." Xavier pinned the badge to his vest. "I'll bring her back, Sheriff. You have my word." With that, he mounted Thunder and rode out of town, following the tracks left by Hastings' gang. The moon was nearly full, providing enough light to track by, at least for the first few hours. Xavier pushed Thunder hard, knowing that every minute mattered. Hastings would be headed for his hideout in the foothills of the Sierra Madre, a place rumored to be impregnable. As dawn broke over the desert, Xavier paused only long enough to water Thunder at a small creek. The tracks were still fresh. Hastings wasn't pushing his men or their mounts, clearly not expecting pursuit. That overconfidence might be his only advantage. By midday, the sun was merciless, baking the rocky terrain. Xavier had shed his coat hours ago, the sweat-soaked shirt beneath clinging to his back. Thunder was showing signs of fatigue, but the stallion's spirit matched his rider's determination. "Just a little further, boy," Xavier encouraged, patting the horse's neck. The tracks led into a narrow canyon, a perfect place for an ambush. Xavier dismounted and led Thunder carefully, scanning the ridge above for any sign of lookouts. His caution was rewarded when he spotted a man dozing against a boulder, a rifle across his lap. One of Hastings' sentries, no doubt. Xavier tied Thunder to a scrub pine and silently made his way up the rocky slope. The sentry never stirred as Xavier approached from behind and pressed the barrel of his Colt to the man's head. "Make a sound and it'll be your last," Xavier whispered. The man froze, then slowly raised his hands. Xavier used the man's own bandana to gag him and bound his hands with rope from his saddlebags. "How many men with Hastings?" Xavier demanded, removing the gag. 15, the sentry admitted, his eyes darting nervously to the canyon below. "They're camped about a mile ahead by the old mining shack. And the woman, she's unharmed, last I saw. Hastings is keeping her close." Xavier replaced the gag and left the man securely tied to the boulder. He wouldn't be found for hours, by which time Xavier hoped to have Leanna safely away from Hastings' camp. Returning to Thunder, Xavier led the horse carefully through the canyon, staying close to the shadow of the cliff face. The sound of voices grew louder as he approached the abandoned mining operation. He left Thunder concealed behind a cluster of boulders and crept forward on foot. The camp was set up in a small clearing, with the dilapidated shack serving as Hastings' headquarters. Men lounged around several campfires, some playing cards, others cleaning weapons. Xavier searched the scene until he spotted Leanna sitting outside the shack, her hands bound in front of her. She looked tired but uninjured, her chin lifted in defiance as Hastings spoke to her. Xavier retreated to assess his options. 15 against 1 were impossible odds in a direct confrontation. He needed a diversion. As the sun began to set, an opportunity presented itself. Several men left the camp with canteens, heading toward a nearby spring. Xavier circled around and intercepted them, taking down 2 with silent efficiency and binding the third. "How many men guard the woman at night?" Xavier asked, his voice hard. "Just 1, the terrified outlaw replied. "Inside the shack with her in Hastings." Xavier nodded. "If you want to live, you'll do exactly as I say." Under the cover of darkness, Xavier implemented his plan. He sent the captured outlaw back to camp with the others' canteens, instructing him to tell Hastings that he'd seen riders approaching from the north, possibly a posse. The diversion worked. Hastings immediately dispatched 8 men to investigate, leaving only 6 in camp. Xavier waited until the camp settled for the night, the remaining men clustering around a single fire. He circled to the back of the shack, where a small window provided a view inside. Leanna sat on a crude cot, her hands still bound. Hastings was at a table examining papers by lantern light. A guard stood by the door, his rifle leaning against the wall. Xavier needed to draw the guard out. He picked up a small stone and tossed it against the far side of the shack. The soft thud was enough. After a moment, the door opened and the guard stepped out, scanning the darkness. Xavier moved quickly. A swift blow to the back of the head dropped the guard silently to the ground. He dragged the unconscious man behind a scrub bush before approaching the open door. Hastings was still bent over his papers, his back to the entrance. Xavier stepped inside, his gun raised. "Don't move, Hastings," he commanded. Hastings stiffened but didn't turn. "Blackburn, you're a persistent man. Put your hands where I can see them." Hastings slowly raised his hands, then spun with unexpected speed, hurling the lantern at Xavier. The glass shattered, oil splashing across the floor and igniting instantly. Xavier jumped back, momentarily blinded by the flash of flames. In that instant, Hastings drew his revolver. A shot cracked through the air, and Xavier felt a searing pain across his upper arm. He fired back instinctively, his bullet finding its mark in Hastings' shoulder. Hastings staggered but managed to lunge toward Leanna, grabbing her by the hair and using her as a shield. The fire was spreading rapidly, smoke filling the small shack. "Drop your weapon or she dies," Hastings snarled, pressing his gun to Leanna's temple. Xavier hesitated, his own weapon still trained on Hastings. Through the smoke, he could see the fear in Leanna's eyes, but also a steely determination. She gave him the slightest of nods. Understanding flashed between them. In one fluid motion, Leanna slammed her bound hands upward, knocking Hastings' gun arm aside. The weapon discharged harmlessly into the ceiling as Xavier fired, his bullet striking Hastings squarely in the chest. The outlaw leader collapsed, releasing his grip on Leanna. Xavier rushed forward, using his knife to cut her bonds. "We need to get out of here," he coughed, the smoke growing thicker by the second. "The whole place is going up." He led her to the door, but the commotion had alerted the men at the campfire. Shouts rang out as they spotted the escaping pair and the flames engulfing the shack. "Run for the boulders," Xavier instructed, drawing his second revolver. "I'll cover you." Leanna hesitated. "Not without you." "Go," he insisted, firing at the approaching outlaws, forcing them to dive for cover. "I'll be right behind you." She ran, crouching low as Xavier continued to provide covering fire. When she reached the relative safety of the boulders, he backed away from the shack, still facing the gunman. A bullet whizzed past his ear, another kicking up dirt at his feet. He returned fire methodically, making each shot count. By the time he reached the boulders, the shack was fully ablaze, illuminating the area with an eerie, flickering light. The remaining outlaws were pinned down, unable to approach without exposing themselves to Xavier's deadly aim. "Thunder's just behind those rocks," he told Leanna, indicating a spot about 50 yards away. "Can you make it?" She nodded, gathering her skirts. Together, they made a dash for it, bullets peppering the ground around them. Xavier felt a sharp sting as one grazed his thigh, but adrenaline kept him moving. They reached Thunder, who snorted nervously at the smell of gunpowder and smoke. Xavier helped Leanna mount, then swung up behind her, wincing as his wounded arm protested. He spurred Thunder forward, and the powerful horse responded, carrying them away from the firefight and into the sheltering darkness of the canyon. They rode hard for several miles, the sound of pursuit gradually fading behind them. When Xavier felt confident they had put enough distance between themselves and the outlaws, he slowed Thunder to a walk, allowing the exhausted animal to recover. "Are you hurt?" he asked Leanna, suddenly aware of how tightly she was gripping his arm. "No," she replied, her voice steadier than he expected. "But you're bleeding." He glanced down at his arm. The bullet had torn through his sleeve, leaving a bloody furrow across his bicep. "It's just a graze. I've had worse." "We should clean it before it becomes infected," she insisted. Xavier nodded toward a small copse of trees ahead. "There's water there. We'll stop briefly." At the small spring, Leanna tore a strip from her petticoat to bandage his arm, her touch gentle yet firm. Xavier watched her face in the moonlight, struck by her composure after all she had endured. "You're remarkably calm for someone who was just kidnapped and nearly killed," he observed. A small smile touched her lips. "My father always said panicking never solved anything. Besides, I knew someone would come. You were counting on the sheriff." She met his eyes. "I was counting on you." The simple statement touched something deep within Xavier. He had spent years drifting, never staying in one place long enough to form attachments. Yet in the short time he had known Leanna Bailey, she had awakened feelings he thought long buried. "We should keep moving," he said, breaking the moment. "Hastings' men will regroup by morning." They rode through the night, Xavier pushing Thunder as much as he dared. The loyal horse responded valiantly, seeming to sense the urgency of their situation. Dawn found them crossing a vast plateau, the mountains a distant blue line on the horizon. "My ranch is beyond those foothills," Xavier said, pointing. "We should reach it by nightfall." Leanna leaned back against him, fatigue evident in the slump of her shoulders. "Your horse can't maintain this pace much longer. He's exhausted." Xavier patted Thunder's neck, feeling the tremors of exertion beneath his hand. "You're right. We'll find a place to rest soon." They found shelter in a small box canyon with a spring-fed pool at its center. Xavier helped Leanna dismount, both of them stiff from the long ride. Thunder immediately lowered his head to drink, sides heaving with exertion. "He's a magnificent animal," Leanna commented, running her hand along the horse's sweaty neck. "Best I've ever owned," Xavier agreed, removing the saddle to give Thunder relief. "Raised him from a colt." Leanna knelt by the pool, splashing water on her face and neck. The cool liquid revived her, washing away some of the dust and fatigue of their journey. Xavier joined her, drinking deeply before refilling their canteens. "Why did you come after me?" she asked suddenly. "You barely know me. You risked your life." Xavier considered the question, surprising himself with the honesty of his answer. "From the moment I walked into your store, there was something about you, a strength, an independence that reminded me of myself, I suppose. When I heard Hastings had taken you, I couldn't stand by and do nothing." Leanna studied him, her eyes searching his face. "You're not like other men I've met, Xavier Blackburn." "Is that good or bad?" he asked with a small smile. "I'm still deciding," she replied, but her eyes held a warmth that hadn't been there before. They rested for several hours, allowing Thunder to recover his strength. Xavier kept watch while Leanna slept fitfully, her dreams clearly troubled by the ordeal she had endured. When she cried out once, he moved to her side, gently touching her shoulder. "You're safe," he assured her as she startled awake. "It's just a dream," she nodded, drawing a shaky breath. "Thank you for everything." By mid-afternoon, they were moving again, Thunder's stride stronger after the rest. They traveled more cautiously now, Xavier frequently checking their back trail for signs of pursuit. The terrain grew more familiar as they neared his property, the landscape transitioning from barren plateau to rolling grassland. As the sun began to set, Xavier pointed to a plume of smoke rising in the distance. There, home. They crested a small rise, and his ranch came into view, a substantial main house with several outbuildings, corrals, and a bunkhouse. Cattle dotted the surrounding pastures, and a small creek wound through the property. "It's beautiful," Leanna said, genuine admiration in her voice. "It's taken me years to build it up," Xavier replied. "Started with nothing but 50 acres and a dream." As they approached, a stocky woman emerged from the main house, shading her eyes against the setting sun. Mrs. Wilkins, the housekeeper, raised a hand in greeting, then hurried back inside, likely to prepare for their arrival. Two ranch hands came running from the bunkhouse, concern evident on their faces as they took in Thunder's exhausted condition and their boss's bloodied appearance. "Mr. Blackburn, what happened?" asked the older of the two, a grizzled cowboy named Hank. "Trouble," Xavier replied simply, dismounting carefully. "Take care of Thunder. He's ridden nearly to death today." "Yes, sir," Hank said, immediately leading the horse toward the stable. The younger ranch hand helped Leanna down, his eyes widening as he took in her torn dress and disheveled appearance. "Madam," he said respectfully, tipping his hat. Mrs. Wilkins reappeared, bustling down the path with a determined expression. "Inside, both of you," she commanded, taking charge with the authority of a woman who had run the household for years. "Mr. Blackburn, you're bleeding all over my clean porch. And you, miss, look like you've been dragged through a thorn bush backward." Despite her brusque manner, the housekeeper's eyes were kind as she ushered them inside. The main house was comfortably furnished, with solid oak furniture and colorful woven rugs covering the plank floors. "Bath for both of you," Mrs. Wilkins decreed. "And then I'll see to that arm, Mr. Blackburn." "Miss Bailey," Leanna supplied. "Leanna Bailey. Miss Bailey, I've put fresh towels and a nightgown in the guest room. There's hot water on the stove for your bath. I'll have Jake bring up the tub." Leanna looked uncertainly at Xavier, who nodded reassuringly. "Mrs. Wilkins will take good care of you. We'll talk after you've rested." An hour later, Leanna descended the stairs feeling almost human again. Her hair was still damp from the bath, and she wore a borrowed dress that Mrs. Wilkins had hastily altered to fit her smaller frame. She found Xavier in the kitchen, his arm properly bandaged, a cup of coffee steaming before him. "Better?" he asked, rising as she entered. "Much," she admitted, accepting the cup Mrs. Wilkins offered her. "Though I fear your housekeeper's dress may never recover from my wearing it." "Nonsense," Mrs. Wilkins said, placing a plate of stew before each of them. "It looks far better on you than it ever did on me. Now eat, both of you. You need your strength." They ate in comfortable silence, the events of the past 24 hours catching up with them in a wave of exhaustion. When they finished, Mrs. Wilkins shooed them into the parlor with strict instructions to rest. "Hastings' men will come looking for us," Leanna said as they settled into chairs before the fireplace. "I've brought trouble to your doorstep." Xavier shook his head. "My men are well armed and loyal. The ranch is defensible. Besides, with Hastings dead, his gang will likely scatter. And if they don't, then we'll face them together." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "Leanna, I want you to know that you're welcome to stay here as long as necessary. When it's safe, I'll take you back to Red Canyon." She studied the dancing flames for a long moment. "I'm not sure there's anything to go back to. Hastings has the deed to my property. Even if his men don't use it, the bank will likely foreclose on the store now." "The deed is worthless without your signature," Xavier pointed out, "and Hastings is dead." Hope flickered in her eyes. "You're right. I never signed anything. We'll sort it out," he promised. "But first, you need to rest." The following days settled into an unexpected rhythm. Leanna recovered quickly from her ordeal, her natural resilience asserting itself. She took to ranch life with surprising enthusiasm, helping Mrs. Wilkins with household tasks, and even venturing to the corrals to watch Xavier work with his horses. For his part, Xavier found himself increasingly drawn to her. Her practical intelligence, her quiet strength, and occasionally her stubborn independence, all combined to create a woman unlike any he had known before. On the fifth evening, they walked together to a small rise overlooking the ranch, the sunset painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "I've sent word to Sheriff Parker," Xavier said, breaking a comfortable silence. "Let him know you're safe. He's dealing with the legal issues concerning your property." Leanna nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Thank you." He turned to face her. "You don't have to thank me." "Yes, I do," she insisted. "You risked everything for me, your life, your horse, your home. Why would anyone do that for a stranger?" Xavier reached out, gently touching her cheek. "You're not a stranger, Leanna, not anymore." The moment hung between them, charged with unspoken emotions. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, Xavier leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, questioning at first, then deepening as Leanna responded, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. When they parted, her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright in the fading light. "I've wanted to do that since the moment I saw you standing behind that counter," Xavier admitted. A smile touched her lips. "And I've wanted you to, though I'd never have admitted it then." They walked back to the house hand in hand, something new and fragile blossoming between them. That night, Leanna dreamed not of danger and pursuit, but of possibilities she had never before considered. 2 weeks passed in relative peace. No sign of Hastings' men appeared, and a telegram from Sheriff Parker confirmed that most of the gang had indeed scattered after their leader's death. The deed to Leanna's property had been recovered from Hastings' body and was being held safely at the sheriff's office. "You could return to Red Canyon whenever you wish," Xavier told her as they sat on the porch after dinner. "Sheriff Parker says your store is intact, though it needs some cleaning after Hastings' men ransacked it." Leanna was quiet for a long moment. "I should go back," she finally said. "The store was my parents' legacy. I can't abandon it." Xavier nodded, trying to hide the disappointment he felt. "I understand. I'll take you whenever you're ready." She turned to him, reading the emotion he couldn't quite conceal. "Xavier, these past weeks, they've meant more to me than I can express." He took her hands in his. "They've meant everything to me. I have to go back," she repeated, "but I don't want to lose what we've found together." Hope rose in Xavier's chest. "What are you saying, Leanna?" "I'm saying that Red Canyon is only 2 days' ride from here. That's not so far for a man who once rode until his horse nearly collapsed to save a woman he barely knew." She smiled, her eyes reflecting the lamplight from inside. "I'm saying that perhaps there's a future for us if you want it as much as I do." Xavier pulled her into his arms, his heart fuller than he had ever known it could be. "I want it more than anything." Their second kiss was deeper, more confident, a promise of all that might come. When they separated, both were breathless. Their futures suddenly intertwined in ways neither had anticipated when fate first brought them together. 3 days later, they departed for Red Canyon. Thunder, fully recovered from his ordeal, carried them both proudly, seeming to understand the importance of the journey. They traveled at a leisurely pace, enjoying the time together before facing the realities awaiting them in town. They arrived in Red Canyon to find the community buzzing with the news of Hastings' death and Leanna's rescue. Sheriff Parker met them at the edge of town, relief evident on his weathered face. "Miss Bailey, it does my heart good to see you safe." he said, tipping his hat. "And Blackburn, I knew you were the right man for the job." The sheriff escorted them to Lena's store, where several townspeople had gathered to welcome her home. The building showed signs of rough treatment, broken windows, splintered shelves, but the structure itself was sound. "Folks have been pitching in to clean up," Sheriff Parker explained. "They're mighty fond of you, Miss Bailey." Tears welled in Lena's eyes as she surveyed the damage, then the impromptu welcome committee. "Thank you," she said simply. "All of you." That evening, after the well-wishers had departed, and temporary repairs had been made to the store's windows and doors, Lena and Xavier sat together on the small porch behind the building. "It's going to take time to get everything back in order," she sighed, leaning against his shoulder. "You'll manage," he assured her, "and I'll help for as long as you need me." She smiled up at him. "And how long might that be, Mr. Blackburn?" Xavier's heart swelled with love for this remarkable woman who had so unexpectedly become the center of his world. "How does forever sound, Miss Bailey?" Her answer was in the kiss she gave him, full of promise and certainty. They would face challenges, of course, the distance between the ranch and the store, the rebuilding of her business, the gossip that would inevitably follow their unconventional courtship. But in that moment, under the starlit Arizona sky, none of that mattered. 6 months later, on a perfect spring day, Leanna Bailey became Leanna Blackburn in a simple ceremony in Red Canyon's small church. The entire town turned out to witness the union of their beloved shopkeeper and the rancher who had risked everything to save her. After the wedding, a decision had to be made about where they would live. Xavier's ranch was thriving, but Lena's store was equally important to her. The solution, when it came, was both practical and romantic. They would divide their time between both places, with capable assistants managing each in their absence. As the years passed, their love only deepened. The store expanded, becoming the most successful business in Red Canyon. The ranch prospered, its cattle sought after throughout the territory. They had 2 children, a boy and a girl, who grew up equally at home on horseback and behind a store counter. Sometimes, on quiet evenings at the ranch, Xavier would watch Lena as she sat on the porch, her face softened by the golden light of sunset, and marvel at how close he had come to losing her before he truly found her. And sometimes, catching his gaze, she would smile and remind him of the desperate ride that had brought them together. "You rode until thunder could barely stand," she would say, "all for a woman you hardly knew." And he would take her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm, and reply, "I'd do it again in a heartbeat. For you, I'd ride until the end of the earth." In a land where survival often depended on strength and determination, their love story became legendary, the tale of a brave shopkeeper, a determined rancher, and the unbreakable bond forged in the fires of adversity. It was a reminder that even in the wild and unforgiving West, love could blossom and endure, changing lives forever.